We recently got an amazing opportunity to make something truly epic for a game we've fallen into, the world of Trench Crusade. A grim and dark world full of prayers and bullets, and we've gotten to craft in this world. We are making terrain for this new wargame, official terrain for the year of our Lord 1914 Trench Crusade. Sanctioned by the Trench Crusade team, we've been working together with them to bring this horrifying world into our own.
But first, we need some lumber. A nice hard board needs some nice hard wood.
What?
We are building the demo board for the Trench Crusade booth at the premier hobby and gaming convention, Nova Open in Washington, D.C. We have built many a board, and we're making this one especially robust. If it can handle us playing on it, it can handle anything. Getting home with some new materials, we can supplement this with some of my own. This 2x4 actually came from when I was renovating my house, and I had some extras, and it feels very fitting that it is now gonna become Trench Crusade. Wearing my apron and carrying a big stick, I actually feel a little bit like a Trench Crusader. Time to get started with some machinery. I ripped down some 2x4s, getting a nice clean edge to measure against our terrain. Once I had the size, I ran the board through again and again until I had some actually nice pieces. This would have looked better as a Trench Crusade board than my new bathroom anyway. I came up with this board in Tinkercad. It's a 3-tier design, giving us a lot of height to turn heads at the demo table at Nova and to show off our Catacomb of the Blessed Dead terrain beautifully. I've been staring at this in digital 3D for so long, I can't wait to see it in real life 3D. I cut the surfaces into shape and hacked out all my pieces. I'm really giving my table saw a workout today. Then it was time to assemble. I used lots of glue and my sketchy nailer. I like to keep my fingers away from this thing if I can help it. These frames will give the board its strength, and the surface will keep it plumb. I lathered it down in glue and shot so many nails. This is the 2x2 foundation. The next level up will cover about half this. I made up another frame of wood for the top and drew out the irregular shape this layer of walls will take and then cut it out, giving it more glue and more nails. It's all lining up, so far so good, so up next, the top floor. This will be the smallest section, which is good because I was running out of good scrap wood. I cut out the top section. I got away with using the scraps from layer 2. A little more nailing and a little more gluing, and the foundation of the board is done. Kaboom! A nice 3-layer cake made the way the pros do, with a table saw and staples that are way too big. And this is just the bones. The next step is the frosting. And that frosting is copious amounts of our terrain. We originally figured it all out in Tinkercad, and then our artist Liqerise and I came up with what it was gonna look like. Our sculptor Radium Minis created all of the beautiful intricacies. Sean over here did the test printing, finding all of the errors and flaws and unforeseen problems in engineering. Nick fixed all of those for us, and we have been fussing with this stuff until we have ground it into perfect little pieces. And now that they are perfect little pieces, the next step is getting some paint on these pieces. First with some spray paint base coats, and then we're gonna be doing some real fine-tune painting. You're gonna be doing some fine-tune painting.
I'm gonna try.
The Catacombs of the Blessed Dead is our first crowdfunding campaign, and we are running it through GameFound. Official Trench Crusade terrain by EonsOfBattle. We have been working on bringing this to life for half a year. We have a link in the description to take you to the page to sign up and get notified when the campaign goes live, and a sweet free piece of terrain with a pledge. The project is in pre-campaign right now and will launch on September 1st. We're really excited to finally unveil what we've been working so hard on. I used up most of my ragtag collection of quarter-full bottles of spray paint to get the walls a mottled mix of black, green, brown, and tan. Then Sean and I retired to my painting dungeon to get even more paint on these. All right, we got some nice moody looking walls. I kept these very dark on purpose because now we're gonna brighten them out while we pick out all of the bricks and the detail. There is a lot on these suckers, but I think we can do it in a really, really efficient way and a very unique way, and it is going to involve this. I've been using synthetic sea sponge a lot on my minis, and finally I bought some fresh ones, and when they arrived, I did not get what I expect. Cutting open the package, it left a lot to be desired. Wow, these are a little bit sad. It's supposed to look like this. These are ones that I bought from the art store that were not vacuum sealed. Hopefully, I worked a little bit. It fluffed up.
I guess.
It'll work. These aren't nearly as nice as my old ones. These feel like the foam inside my couch, but they'll get the job done. Once we finally had them fluffed up, we tore them apart to get a nice rough texture and then started sponging on some dark tan. The soft surface of the sponge only catches on the raised areas, depositing this paint on the bricks, wood, and skulls. So many skulls. After the tan, we switched to a yellow, doing the same sponging over everything to brighten up the color, and then to finish it off, we did a little bit more delicate sponging of some tan. This was quite the endeavor, and eventually our fingers got tired, so we put the pieces into some forceps to hold them for us. And we went through the better part of 3 bottles of paint. While we worked, Sean and I were chit-chatting about Trench Crusade. So Sean, your Trench Crusade faction is the bad guys. Imagine that.
I play Heretic Legion. I like playing the bad guys, I admit. And I think what drew me to the Heretic Legion was that they have the best shooting of all of them. The Heretic Legion is the only one that can do anything with like your normal bolt action rifles or machine guns and things like that. So that's what drew me to them initially. Along with like, they get some really cool units like the Artillery Witch, who gets to pull artillery shells from hell, basically, and throw them at their enemies.
I really like the Trench Pilgrims because, you know, the other factions, they have like orders and rules and logic and reason. The Pilgrims is just a bunch of dudes, a bunch of randos falling around a big lug called the Anchorite Shrine. There's the stigmatic nuns who just run around and shoot stuff with their automatic pistols and stab stuff with their swords. There is the ecclesiastical prisoner, which is just a like Russian roulette, the game that you're playing with yourself, because they don't have no guns and they don't have no armor. They just, you run in and you explode and you hope for the best.
And that doesn't always happen.
No, I blew up and I did no damage, but that's what happens when you're an ecclesiastic prisoner. After hours and hours, we got the walls looking like this. Pretty good. Now to go back and pick out all the stuff. All the wood, candles, artillery shells, shields, and skulls all got browned. After a base coat, it was time to start picking out all the little things. For colors, I looked closely at the Trench Crusade artwork, and I found reds and greens were really prominent, so I want to bring those tones onto this board. We started picking out all the things, going one by one using this palette to finish each element. On the wood, skulls, and candles, these spots got dry brushed with brown and tan. This dry brushing will give a much smoother look than the sponging we were doing earlier. Then we gave them a final dusting of white paint to make these elements shine. Then we hunted down all the metal bits and hit these with some gold and silver speed paint. At this point in the night, Nick had joined us too, and we all did our part to bring these walls to life. We have a lot of wall designs. We actually brought some prototypes of these walls with us to Adepticon this year, where they were painted in a speed painting competition hosted by Death Wish Games. I tried to freehand a little something on every shield, and for some of the candles, I used speed paint through the airbrush to make them glow, and then picked out all the little wicks with some yellow paint for the flicker. My favorite wall is this crucified guy with a bouquet of bones radiating out of his head. To break up the colors a little, I made some of the candles red so that they stood out strongly against the backdrop of skulls. Looking at the finished product all lined up, they really are a grimdark I Spy for details. Now onto the barricades. These are little walls of debris, the perfect size for wargaming that'll shield my poor pilgrims from whatever nasty shooting Sean has in store for me. We hosed down the bottom half of these pieces with black paint and then used a damp paper towel to wipe it off the raised areas, leaving the recesses dark. Then we hit these with the same triad of sponging, which brightened them back up. Then we started hitting the details. The skulls got brown, tan, and white, and the chains got some metal speed paint. And all the tombstones got some freehanding. I painted a lot of crosses over these boards. While we were picking out the details, Nick and I discussed his Trench Crusade ambitions. Sean, you look different.
Yeah, I shaved.
Sean and I were talking previously about what factions we were thinking about for Trench Crusade. Which one do you have your eye on?
I really like the Black Grail, specifically for the Plague Knight. Plague Knight's really cool. I like its snoot.
Is it just the Plague Knight? Just that's the model?
And the Herald of Beelzebub. Pretty interesting.
Which one is the Herald of Beelzebub?
He's all goopy. I mean, they're all goopy, but he's really goopy.
In our Catacombs of the Blessed Dead, there are also debris piles. There are so many skulls, they're falling off the walls. The catacombs are built in such a way to make a tight claustrophobic environment, and these barricades and debris provide even more cover. In Trench Crusade, models can die fast, so every little bit of protection helps. And speaking of things being dangerous, planks. These boards span over top the terrain, letting models run overhead or jump down to get those sweet diving charge bonuses. All these boards got a poor man's wash of black paint, and then we wiped it off the high spots with a damp paper towel and then some dry brushing of yellow and brown. That is every single piece of Catacombs painted. Now we gotta build it. This terrain was designed to be completely modular with pillars and walls that freestand so they can be arranged and rearranged into any shape, letting you play your games and campaigns in any section of the Catacombs, whether deep underground or just below the surface, in danger of getting shelled by infernal bombs. Alright, I got my cake, I've got my frosting, but I need to mix the ingredients together now. I also need to glue this board. Probably could have done that earlier, but I didn't think of it. I'm using so much glue on this board, it's gonna get used and abused, so I want it as strong as possible. And can there ever really be too much glue? My woodwork actually lined up pretty well, and I used some duct tape to hold down the pieces while it dries. Attaching the top layer of my cake, it is finally ready to be frosted, and I actually have some frosting. I think that duct tape will keep it nice while it dries. Now I gotta glue everything together, and I got some Loctite Power Grab. 0-second instant grab, all purpose. I'm very dubious about the Insta Grab because I feel like every single glue super overpromises, but we'll see what happens. I set up all of the terrain in its place so I would know what goes where. Nick had to help me with this. We drew up the plans a long time ago digitally, but luckily we did make the right number of pieces. It looks pretty good. Oh, it looked good gray, and now it looks even better painted. I kind of feel like it's done. I think the Trench Crusade people will like this look. It's rustic. Okay, I'm gonna glue it. I had to do a little bit of emergency surgery to get the wood in the correct shape, which did lead to an earthquake on the rest of the board, but eventually it was time to try out this new construction adhesive. It was a bit of a struggle, and this stuff is thick, but it was tacky enough to hold, and once it's dry, it should be incredibly strong. I found putting this stuff on the wood and then squishing the pieces down into the white sticky goo worked the best. I worked my way around the board, getting each piece nice and situated, and it brought back memories of building gingerbread houses. But unlike those projects, this one was successful. You know, I was poo-pooing the Loctite Power Grab, and it's kind of fussy and hard to work with, but it's like the exact consistency of gingerbread house frosting, but it did work out, and I think it's gonna be really, really strong when it's dry. Keyword when it's dry. The wood glue is kind of settling, this glue is kind of settling, everything is a little bit wishy-washy, but I'm gonna keep going. In a few places, I left room for destroyed sections, like the catacombs are slowly crumbling, and I used my saw to carve away the ground and I shoved some foam into the big caved-in section. I used my Dremel to mess up the edge of the wood so it wasn't so perfect, and speaking of perfect, the ground is looking a little too flat. I know how to fix this and it involves more white sticky stuff. I mixed up some Sculptamold, this is paper mache, and I added some brown paint so that this will match the color of the floor once it's time for painting. I pressed this stuff into the ground and smeared it with my fingers, making some little piles here and there, wrapping it around the walls, giving the floor a nice irregular surface. With the paint mixed in there, it looks and feels a lot like dirt. The brown paste has been smeared and is now dry, but I think before I get too much deeper into the Catacombs of the Blessed Dead, I need to fill some of these holes before I get too deep in the process. I used my airbrush to blast black paint into these holes. If I had planned better, I could have just sprayed these from the inside before I glued it together, but this works too. Now to solve another problem, what to do on the ground. I have about 1 billion of these perfect sticks, and they will make perfect wood planks. I used some pliers to break these into irregular lengths and then started gluing them down with plenty of wood glue. I buy my wood glue in bulk. I put these sticks in all the places that don't have goo. I don't think the catacombs ever had a proper floor, just a ragtag assortment of different finishes. I periodically changed the direction to add some more texture to this look, and once the sticks were down, I need to color them like the goo. I mixed up some transparent inks with water and glazed this over the wood. This color soaked in and stained the wood, giving me a little bit of the natural fibers and shapes, but a lot of the sickly brown color. Half a box of popsicle sticks later, well, more like 1/5 of a box of popsicle sticks, and the wood is all done. Now it is time to make the paste. And I have all sorts of things to try out for the paste. I've got a big heavy bag of sand, but I'm kind of hoping I don't have to use too much of it because I have this Rolotex. This is something that you put on your walls. You should never put this on your walls ever, but you mix it with paint and it makes the paint be like gritty. The previous owner put it in my house, and so I have to use this stuff when I paint my walls, which is garbage, but it won't be garbage on this board. I've got lots and lots of cheap paint, I got lots of brushes, and I got lots and lots of glue. To make my own texture paste, I need a lot of white glue. This will keep the material down and give it a little bit of a body. Then I started pouring in some paint. A bunch of tan, a bunch of yellowish stuff, a little bit of green, and I mixed it together and it all made tan. Then I started mixing in my Rolotex, and this is basically artificial sand. It's very light and I poured in enough so that this concoction about doubled in size. Then I poured some of this stuff into a baggie and nipped off the end to make a piping bag. I used this piping bag to squirt the goo right along the corner where the walls meet the floor. I want the sand to pile up against the walls. I squirted it all over and then smeared it in between the wood, and I started pulling it off with paper towel, but eventually I found another solution. I used a sponge to wipe it away, then I would clean off the sponge in a bucket of water. This way I can really attack the paste, wiping it off the top of the wood and only leaving a thin layer on the ground surrounding it. This was a messy process, but it'll get the color and texture everywhere that's not the walls. The texture paste was a very sticky, messy process, but now that it is on there, this is a lovely looking catacomb. This is the catacombs after like some spring cleaning. Everything is perfect and vacuumed and lovely, but Trench Crusade is a grim dark game and it needs one more layer of grim dark. But that grim darkness is gonna be the last step. And so before I put on the final paint, really gotta do something about these sides. I've been trying to decide what to do to make the sides nice. Currently, the bare 2x4 in Luon is structurally sound, but not particularly attractive. I took some painter's tape and masked off the catacombs, shoving tinfoil into the tricky spots. I laid a line running down all along the edge, and then used some plastic to cover everything else. It's got a nice plastic bonnet on there now, and I've been racking my brain thinking about how I can get a nice surface on this. And the best way I could think of is buying one of these. Nick helped me drag the board outside. The neighbors were giving me some weird looks as I blasted through the wood with the belt sander. I took off enough so that the sides were reasonably flat, and then I lathered them up with some wood putty, and this will fill in all the little nail holes and scratches, letting me get some really good edges. Once this was dry, I gave it a sanding with some 120 grit sandpaper, and then another layer of mud and a sanding of 220 grit. This all made a lot of dust, so I gave the board a good blow, and then it was time to pull off the tape. Now everything is nice, and I can finally finish this board. This morning I was sticky from the texture paste, and now I'm sweaty and dusty. But this is probably the nicest thing we've ever made. Now it is time for some primer. After mixing this up, I gave the rim of the board a nice coat and left this alone to dry while I moved on to give the board a grimdark finish. I mixed up all my brown inks with flow improver, water, and a drop of dish soap to reduce the surface tension and to help this flow into the cracks and crevices. Then I gave all the ground a nice once over. I ended up having enough for one solid coat, and I came back in with some burnt umber through the airbrush, which I sprayed all along the walls and a random mottled dusting along the sand to darken it a bit. Then I took yellow and my biggest dry brush and dry brushed the whole ground. This board is so color saturated that a dry brushing of yellow looks tan. Now to add a little more storytelling to this board. Skirmishers are fought on this board, and I want to add some blood. I mixed some transparent red paint with gloss medium and then dripped a brush into this mix and then flicked off some big drops, and then I gave it a puff with the airbrush to make some nice disgusting spray. Something real bad happened in all these spots. Now, like most of my projects, it's time to give the rim of the base a coat of black paint, and I'm using the same color I always do, Apple Barrel Gloss Black. About 3 coats gave me some nice coverage, and then to get a more professional look, I added a vignette. This is a little shadow right along the edge to blend the sides into the scene, making a nice transition. And while I had the black in my airbrush, I cleaned up the holes in the board as well. I wonder what mysterious horrors climb out of these. The Catacombs of the Blessed Dead. If these walls could talk, they would talk about how many meetings we had about skull placement, sizing, structure, location, iterations, and in the end, it's perfect. A hallowed place where the bones of the righteous are buried, and where the still living fight zealously to keep this sacred place free from hell's influence. We've been inspired by Trench Crusade, and in addition to the catacomb terrain, we have crafted our own designs for who is fighting in these grimdark corridors. The Catacomb Sappers, Guardians of the Crypts, and the Grace of Flesh, twisted hellspawn who want to desecrate these blessed halls. It's everything I've been dreaming of for the last 6 months. It's taken so long, but it looks so good. Next step, Nova. This board will be there, I'll be there, hopefully in one piece. Big thanks to Sam for lending us some of his Trench Crusade models so that we could take some pictures, but we're also working on our own Trench Crusade warbands. On this board, I'm gonna crush Nick and Sean. Link in the description to follow the game found, The Catacombs of the Blessed Dead. Thanks for watching.